So I do love it when y'all send me interesting articles via DM on Twitter. I don't always respond, I know, because you guys send me like a lot of stuff, but I do try to take a look at as much of what I can. And this article popped into my inbox yesterday from Ryan Brooks of BuzzFeed. I wrote about the generational ennui of Gen Z and young millennials. For many of us, our entire lives have felt like a continuous political and existential crisis. The pandemic has exacerbated that just as we're starting our adult lives. And I gotta tell you, as I read that tweet and I looked at those sourpuss faces of these girls who I'm sure have beautiful smiles when they're actually trying to be happy, but no, we're talking about life-ruining material here, so obviously they can't be smiling, they have to be like, So as I saw this, the very first thought that popped into my head is, we are raising an entire generation of people to completely lack any sort of personal resilience. Now, resilience is a topic that I actually spend quite a bit of time on. I'm chief science officer of a company called Rally Bright. We measure both individual resilience, like personal resilience. We're going to talk about that today. I also do a lot of my work actually going into organizations and measuring the resiliency of different working groups or different teams to help leaders identify what they can do to build higher performing, more resilient teams. So resiliency for me is something that is pretty much constantly on my mind. It's something I think about an awful lot. And resiliency is one of those things that essentially, if you are resilient, you can exist outside of your comfort zone and still push through obstacles, push through barriers to get what you want. And it's a really important quality to have. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to read a little bit of this article. We're not going to read the whole thing because Ryan's article got a little bit away from him. And I'm going to give you some of my criticism. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts. And then I'm going to give you a definition of what individual resilience looks like, and we're going to talk about how that is missing in the course of this conversation. And this is going to be probably a little bit of a longer video, so let's just do this real quick before we get started. Listen, if you like my channel, you like my content, give it a thumbs up, man. Hit subscribe, share it with your friends, whatever. If you think you're subscribed, you may just want to double check that, because YouTube loves unsubscribing people from my channel, as I read about in the comments every single day. All right, now with that out of business, let's check out this article from BuzzFeed. And you can see, listen, I'm worried that I may just be stuck in limbo. We grew up in a world where things have already gone terribly wrong, and our lives are just preparing for the worst. What a horrible quote that is. Her life is just preparing for the worst. Well, if you think it is, yeah, it probably will be, yes. There are people out there who know what the right course of action is, and they're just not willing to listen or take some advice. Because 21-year-olds are usually the people we want to be taking advice from, and not people who have lived life. All right, let's dig into this a little bit. Gia W. realized things weren't going well when she was kicked out of an office in the middle of a job interview. The entire building was shutting down because of the coronavirus pandemic. That surreal experience is just the literal version of what thousands and thousands in Gen Z are experiencing in real time. A sudden stop to their lives just when they're beginning. Now, I think it's important to define what the generations are here. So essentially, I mean, listen, there are different year ranges for different generations, really depending on who you talk to. With Gen Z, we're basically talking about people 23 and younger. For millennials, we're talking about essentially people who are 23, 24, all the way up to my age, which is not quite 40, but not far off. And the reason I think it's important to make that distinction is that when we're talking about the millennial generation, we're not just talking about younger people. In fact, most millennials are like well into their 30s. They are more established. That's not what we're talking about in this article. We're talking about very, very young people at early stages in their lives and their careers. Companies across the United States are starting to rescind job offers, cancel listings, and all that makes sense because of the coronavirus, but I want to keep going down here. I've spent much of the last 2 years reporting on young Americans like myself, so our buddy Ryan is a young person himself, and what's shaped their political ideology. Now, I just want you to ask yourself, as we're reading this article, did Ryan talk to anyone that wasn't a progressive? Because I went to CPAC a little while ago, and I gotta tell you, about half of the attendees at CPAC, if not more, were college students. They're young people. There are young Republicans. There are young independents. There are young centrists. There are young moderates. Not every young person is a progressive. Not every young person is a Bernie Sanders supporter. Ask yourself if we're seeing any other ideology as we go through this article other than, socialism, essentially. Most have few to no mentions of memories of the U.S. before 9/11, unlike millennials and older generations. The country has always felt like it was in a free fall, adrift with a government that they think lacks the imagination and willingness to address the problems that they'll be handed long into their futures. This idea that everything is bad, everything is doom and gloom, and the government's not doing anything to help me, no one's doing anything to help me, they don't listen to me. That is a core mark of a lack of resilience, because first of all, you're literally only looking at the negative things that happen. I was in college when 9/11 happened. I remember it very vividly. I think it was like my sophomore or junior year. No, it was my junior year, because I'm remembering where I was living. And so I've had a full lifetime between 9/11 and now. And listen, man, life has ups and life has downs. There are tragedies in life. There are big things that happen in our lives that shape who we are and how we see the world. But to say that life is only a downward doom and gloom experience and no one is willing to address problems, and they haven't been doing that since 9/11, I'm sorry, that's just wrong. That is absolutely incorrect. You might not like the solutions, but that is not the same thing. In New Hampshire, what? Students told me they're so anxious about their futures and climate change. This is what we're training our students to be worried about. They're worried about their future because they don't see any opportunity for themselves, and they're worried about climate change, which basically in their minds is the end of the world. That they are putting their education on pause to advocate for candidates and the Green New Deal. So these students have very literally made the choice to stop their education. Now, I'm not talking about because of the pandemic. I'm talking about before that. What he's talking about here are students who very literally made the choice to stop going to school, stop pursuing the path they were on, to advocate for these things. Now, is there anything fundamentally wrong with that? No. I'm sure these students can actually learn a lot from fighting for what they believe in. That's all fine, well, and good. But don't complain to me because you made a choice to deter from your path because you couldn't see anything in the world except for doom and gloom. And frankly, I don't blame these kids. They're kids. I'm sorry, I don't care if they're adults. They're kids. They're kids. Their parents should have taught them better. Their parents should have taught them that life is what you make of it. It is what you make of it. If all you see is doom and gloom, then all you experience will be doom and gloom. A year ago, two teenagers who had launched a pseudo-ironic, pseudoscience presidential campaign for Mike Gravel, an old-school 89-year-old leftist, told me as much. Millennials and Generation Z have grown up in a country where there's no hope, and it's incredibly difficult to do better than your parents. I do better than my parents. I do. And I do better than my parents on my own terms. I mean, my father started a business when I was a teenager as well, and he did well as well, but I did better than my parents by the time I was in my mid-30s. And that's not to brag, that's not to give me a pat on the back, but, it is not impossible to do better than your parents. And I didn't come from wealthy means, folks. I didn't come from wealthy means at all. I grew up in a very small town in Vermont. My parents were, at best, middle class. I mean, probably from a lot of my childhood, they were more like lower middle class, I think, but never any higher than middle class. I went to a very underperforming school. I did not have the resources of even like, a moderately performing school that was like right down the street from me. And so, I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for people who are saying, we have no opportunity. To be honest with you, the kids in this article, no, I'm not going to, I probably shouldn't make generalizations, but they probably had more going for them than what I had, and I was able to make something of it. So, I guess I'm giving you some background to explain why my patience for people to say, I can't possibly be successful, it is impossible to do better than your parents. It is not impossible to do anything. You have to have the will to do it, and you have to have the desire to do it. And you have to have, what's that magic word? The resilience to do it. We grew up in the middle of a financial crisis. We're a generation of people who were not even conscious before 9/11. We've seen endless wars. How much faith do you expect us to have in any kind of politics? Well, life is what you make of it, dears. Life is what you make of it. During our lifetimes, the country has always felt like it was in a crisis or teetering on the edge of another, an endless sinking feeling that begins when you realize just how severe the situation might turn out to be. Climate change, gun violence, debt. You get the sense there's no turning back to the world you knew prior. But hang on a second, aren't they saying, quite literally, that they didn't know a world prior to those things? So how could they turn back? And again, why are we teaching these kids that life owes them anything that they aren't willing to go out and fight for? It makes absolutely no sense. It eases on at first a 30,000-foot view of the circumstances and how you think they'll play out coming into focus. You start to see the pieces of a puzzle you desperately don't want to fit together beginning to form. You're free falling into a version of a future you didn't want. That sinking, weightless feeling is what it's felt like for the most part to be alive for the past 20 years. So now what they're saying is you have no control over this. You have absolutely no control. Everything is bad, everything is wrong, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. If you feel as though you do not have control over your situation and over your choices and over what you choose to do, then you are absolutely right. Life will be doom and gloom. If you convince yourself, this is a head game, folks. If you convince yourself in your head that nothing good can possibly happen from this situation, then you will not experience anything good because you have not opened your mind up to experiencing those more positive attributes. You have to be open to it. You have to be willing to receive that there is so much good going on in the world, even right now, in the midst of all this. If you aren't willing to do that, then don't blame anyone else when you have a miserable doom and gloom experience. This is Susanna, who's 21 years old, so Generation Z, remembers when her family used to go into New Orleans after they immigrated to the United States in 2001. They would drive an hour from Baton Rouge for visits to the Venezuelan consulate for visa and paperwork. Let's see. Now a senior at the University of Texas at Austin, she hasn't fully trusted the government to protect citizens since then. So what she's saying is that she basically went through Hurricane Katrina. She saw the government response to it, and she hasn't trusted government to protect citizens since then. You know what? I get that. I really do. I totally get that. But if you don't trust the government to protect citizens, then why are you advocating for socialism? Then why are you advocating for literally the government to step in and start handing you things? If you don't trust them to do the basic things, then why would you trust them to do the big things? That worry was echoed by everyone I've spoken to, writes Ryan. From people worried about their recent decisions, a planned move or a new school, to the increased burden of responsibility they may need to take on to help parents or siblings, to the physical limitations of being stuck in one place. It leaves you scared and wondering, did I make the right choice? Says Stephanie, who's 24. So Stephanie is very young millennial, very, very young. And she came here from Peru. Sorry, I'm really going through this quickly because it is a very long article. She came with her parents from Peru, and now she's literally in a PhD program at Cornell. She's in a PhD program at Cornell. Like, I'm sorry, if you can't see what you got going for you when you are in a doctoral program at Cornell as a young student, God, like what I would have given, man, what I did my PhD the hard way. I did my PhD part-time while I was working full-time. It took me years and years and years of chipping away at it because I didn't have anyone to pay for me. I didn't have anyone to take care of me. I didn't have anyone to support me. I started my PhD program when I was still single, when I was by myself. I had bills to pay, I had rent to pay, and mom and dad weren't giving me money. In fact, mom and dad made it a point for me, like, if you want to buy a house, you're earning that down payment. We're not giving it for you. And so I was doing it all part-time, you know, really staying up very late nights, working all weekend on this thing. I mean, it took me years and years and years. What I would give to be in this girl's position to do a PhD program and have that focused effort at a great school, at a great location. Ithaca is awesome. And she just doesn't realize how much she has going for her because she's been taught everything is doom and gloom. The 2008 financial crisis derailed her parents' dreams. I saw them take any and every job they could to keep us from going completely bankrupt and to keep our apartment and car. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. And that is a horrible thing to go through. And I get it, man. I really do. I get it. However, that does, if like you make a choice about what types of things you want to experience in life. Bad things happen to us. People struggle. All of us go through hardships. Do you want to continue to focus on the hardships, or do you want to focus on the opportunities? Which seems more productive to you? Focus on the hardships or the opportunities? Where your attention goes, grows. What you focus your attention on will become a larger part of your experience. So do you want to focus on the good or do you want to focus on the bad? The choice is entirely up to you, but don't make any excuses if you are focusing on the bad. And then there are some more stories, and I'm going to link this article in the description below if you want to go read all the stories, but like as you can see, like there's a lot. There's a lot. I want to start getting down to the bottom. Let's see. Okay, but as I was talking to students and other 20-somethings, I realized my own experience isn't very different from most of theirs. So essentially what they're saying is like, everyone is having this same experience. No, everyone is not having the same experience. You're only talking to people and recognizing when their experience mirrors yours. That's the very definition of confirmation bias. When we go looking for information that confirms what we already want to believe. All right. Gia, whose job interview got cut short by a building closure, supported Bernie Sanders during the last year's Democratic primary. I am shocked at that revelation. See, she said she was radicalized politically. I mean, she's admitting she's radicalized. That's like, okay, at least they acknowledge it, I guess. By her upbringing in Detroit during the financial crisis, which took a severe toll on the city's auto workers. She said that her neighborhood became a wasteland of empty homes and for sale signs. I saw so many people whose only options, we're going to come back to that one, were to abandon their home and leave and run. And these were full families who had no safety net, no one to take care of them, nothing to fall back on, and their only option was to abandon their lives, she says. I want to talk about this idea of like, they only could make this choice. Folks, we always have choices. We always have a plethora of choices that we can make, and not making a choice also counts as making a choice. You can choose to take action, you can choose to move in a variety of directions, or you can choose to stay where you are. These are, and listen, as we get older, our creativity actually decreases substantially. So when we're very young, when we're little kids, when we're very young, we are so creative. They've done these experiments where they ask little kids, like they show them a paper clip and say like, how many uses could you find for this paper clip? And the kids get super creative, and it's not just about clipping a piece of paper together or bending the paper clip out. Sometimes they think about, oh, what if the paper clip wasn't this big? What if it was this big? And what are the things we could do with it then? They come up with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ideas to use a paper clip for. By the time we reach adulthood, we are maybe able to come up with a dozen ideas. At best, our creativity dramatically reduces. And I push people so hard when I say, I have no other choice. I've tried everything. No, you haven't. You just haven't thought hard enough yet. You haven't looked at the problem creatively, and you're frankly abdicating responsibility for making a more productive choice. Her patriotism was severely diminished. And this is a thing too. This is how you know they didn't talk to any young Republicans for this article. Her patriotism was severely diminished. It just seems like such an illusion. I don't see how older generations can be so patriotic. Because when you're in a time of need, your government has not been there for you. Hang on. I thought we didn't trust the government. So why are we expecting the government to come in and solve all our problems? And maybe older generations are more patriotic because they have lived life. They're not 21 years old. They have lived life enough to know that the more gratitude you can express, the more appreciation that you can have for the positive things that this country offers, that everyone here has access to if they want to take that access. That's why they're patriotic, because they understand that this is a pretty good system. It really is. It has its faults. It is not perfect. It is a constant work in progress, and I don't think anyone has ever made the claim that it is an ideal version, but it presents opportunity for everyone. But we have to be grateful for those opportunities to really take advantage of them. Gia sees parallels to 2008 to 2009 when she watches the country respond to the growing crisis around the pandemic and the dire economic downturn affecting millions of American families. Listen, this is nothing like 2008 and 2009. It's really not. I lived through that recession as well, and it was hard and it was stressful and it was not a fun time, and I was constantly scared, and but this is nothing like that. This is a completely different situation. We can see that now more than ever, with no one having access to healthcare. I'm sorry, no one has access to healthcare? That's just completely wrong. And they're pulling out all of these socialist measures to take care of people because capitalism is having a meltdown right now, she said. It's similar to what happened in 2008 with all of the bailouts, and I feel like we shouldn't have to rely on capitalism and businesses to take care of us, but we should have to rely, right, on the government, which we've already said we don't trust. Listen, the reason that we need to question these kids is because they obviously don't think these things through before they said it, and they don't have the life experience to know how crazy this sounds. People have access to healthcare. People have access to healthcare right now. It may not be, certainly not perfect, but to say that no one has access to healthcare is just wrong. To say that capitalism is having a meltdown is just wrong. Look at the MyPillow dude who stepped up, converted his factory to make masks to support what's going on. That's not capitalism having a meltdown. That's capitalism working. That's private business contributing to the problem, but they don't want to acknowledge it. It feels like so many things that are out of our control in this current political moment, and that we as a generation are constantly being shaped by the forces that don't understand us and don't want to understand us. Jennifer West, a senior at Dartmouth. I worked at Dartmouth, man. Dartmouth is a good school. Dartmouth is a good school. And if this is what they're turning out, they don't care about us, those evil, evil adults. They just don't care about us. Come on, put on your big girl pants, Jennifer. Get up and do something. What are you doing? Listen, I look at folks like Scott Presler. Listen, I disagree with Scott Presler on a lot of things. I really do. But the reason that I love and adore Scott Presler is that he is someone who has said, I'm not going to complain. I'm going to do something. I'm going to help people. I'm going to organize these trash cleanups, even though I'm getting protested by Antifa for a thank you for my good work. I'm going to get up every single day and do everything that I can. That kid is focused. I mean, I feel like I shouldn't call him a kid because he doesn't act like a kid. That adult, that young man is focused on what he wants, and he knows that he has the ability to step up and create the experience that he wants to create. It's a beautiful thing. Jennifer from Dartmouth could learn a few things. Let's see. Things like rampant inequality, things like a need for everyone in the country to have health insurance, things like the impossible demand of paying a rent while having a minimum wage job. Okay, Jennifer, stop. You're a senior at Dartmouth. I lived a mile away from Dartmouth. You absolutely, in that area, can pay rent. Not maybe you absolutely can pay rent with a minimum wage job in that area, 100%. Now, maybe you can't pay rent living right on flipping campus, because that actually is an area where it's gotten more expensive, but I lived literally a mile away from Dartmouth, and I didn't make that much money when I did, and things were absolutely fine. Come on. It's just like this exaggerated version of it. Can you be exactly where you want to be when you're younger? Can you have exactly the apartment that you want to have when you're younger? Can you have exactly the most ideal situation in the world? Well, probably not. Go out and work a couple years, work your way up the ladder and see what's what, man. Do what every single one of us has done. Listen, it's not an accident that I bought my home before I was 30. I worked for it. I wasn't given a down payment from my parents. I went out, I worked my butt off. I was working full time. I also had another part-time business that I was doing to be able to scrape money together because I wasn't making that much money. My first job out of college was $25,000 a year, folks. I was not well off. and I worked hard, and I kept my nose to the grindstone, and I did what I had to do, and I struggled, and I overcame, and I am not special. Anyone can do this. I am not special. I'm not the most talented person. I'm not the smartest person, but I'm driven, and I put my nose to the grindstone, and I get what needs to be done. Every single person can do this, but it is a matter of having that resilience. And she says again, it's not necessarily that we want to place our trust in government. Oh, really? Because that's what you're talking about. It's that we're starting to demand a higher standard than what we're getting right now, because your parents always gave you trophies and taught you that you were a special and unique snowflake. Let's see. Okay, so we're almost done. I just wanted to make sure. Hallie, a 21-year-old biomedical engineering student at UT Austin, agrees. She told me that after the 2016 election, the first event that genuinely shocked her, and probably, I mean, you know, that's fair. That was probably a genuine shock, like the first big shock for a lot of young people. She turned to leftist theory to figure out what had gone wrong. That was exactly the wrong decision, Haley. Leftist theory is not going to explain to you what went wrong, yet leftist theory is an echo chamber. It was the only political outlook that made sense to her, because she doesn't have anyone else to guide her towards differing political outlooks, as she tried to figure out how the country should address disparities. Our whole lives, the structures have failed us, says a student at UT Austin. And we're looking for political stances outside the mainstream because we feel like we don't have time to solve these issues, like income inequality and climate change. Incremental change isn't going to get us there in time, in time to prevent. This is dramatic, but it feels like societal collapse. Yes, you're right. You are being very dramatic, because no one, this is the other thing, man, I don't feel sorry for colleges at all. Colleges are getting their just desserts right now, because this is what they've created. These students that have no resiliency, don't take any personal responsibility for where they are, drives me crazy. And the widespread support for Sanders, who intermingles the humor and nihilism of a generation of Americans who want to push the government to do more, but have no hope in their politicians to push society forward. Man. In a recent Pew Research study, 70% of Gen Zs and 64% of millennials surveyed in 2018 said the government should do more to solve their problems. I've noticed that in slightly older generations, like millennials, there was some hope, but that was taken away through 9/11 and through the 2008 recession. For Gen Z, the hope was never there. We grew up in a world where things had already gone terribly wrong and our lives are just preparing for the worst. It's so hard for me to believe in candidates because I've grown up in a world where everything is going wrong all of the time. And again, folks, I have to say, we create our experiences. We do. We choose where we focus our energy. We choose where we focus our attention. If you are focused on all of the negative things, there's always more negative things to be focused on. We're never going to rid the world of negative things. And frankly, like, what fun would life be if it was all like rainbows and unicorns and kumbaya all the time? There'd be no challenge. There'd be no purpose. There'd be nothing to drive you. You'd be laying around all day eating truffles and watching Netflix and never gaining a pound because life is perfect and we have no struggles. That makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, part of the purpose of being here, I think, is to learn how to overcome different experiences, to build that resilient self where you can stand up for yourself and you know that you have the ability to create whatever experience you want. That's what's so beautiful about mindfulness for me. It's not like the Zen and the meditation and all that stuff. It's the absolute faith that you can create whatever experience you want to create in the world. You can. You may not be able to do it right away. You can't do it at the snap of a finger, but you can do it if you're diligent about it, if you focus your energy in the right way, and you have the right positive mental health space. And these kids have never learned what resilience looks like. So let's talk about that for a second. What does it mean to be a resilient individual? What are the components of resilience? Well, for this, we're going to turn to Rally Bright. Now, Rally Bright is the company that I am the Chief Science Officer of. And again, I do work with individuals and organizations to measure all sorts of different things. What we're going to look at today is the active resilience quotient. And I'm not going to talk a lot about this. I basically just want to use this to define the term resiliency and to talk about the components that make up a highly resilient individual mindset, just so we can have our definitions. And then we can maybe do a little compare contrast with the article as we make our way through it. So this is actually my real score for my resiliency. You can see I'm like not perfect, right? I still have things I need to work on, but we're not interested in the scores so much right now as we are about these definitions. So what does resiliency mean? Resilience is a measure of engagement, persistence, recovery, and growth. High scores indicate a person is more likely to engage with adversity, sustain high levels of performance, recover more quickly than average, and learn from the experience. Low scores suggest someone who is less likely to take a risk or step out of their comfort zone to engage with new or different, and who is unable to engage or manage difficult circumstances, but at a significant cost to their health and well-being. So essentially, what we saw in this article mirrors this definition, right? The people that we talked about in that article, what we're seeing are very low resiliency people because their parents have not taught them to be resilient. Their school system has not taught them to be resilient. We are failing these students, even at Dartmouth. Dartmouth, by the way, is a very conservative school. Dartmouth is not a liberal school. It's a very conservative school. And even there, we're finding that obviously someone who's a senior at Dartmouth right now, according to BuzzFeed, does not have a high level of resilience. All right, so there are 5 components that make up a resilient mindset. We've got readiness, acceptance, insight, intention, and action. Readiness is all about being attentive. Higher readiness scores suggest you are able to focus or refocus your attention as your thoughts, feelings, and situation dictates. Lower scores suggest you might be someone who gets caught up in the past or worries a lot about the future and spends less time in that present moment. When we spend time freaking out about what might happen in the future or worrying about the past, we reduce our ability to focus on what's going on in front of us right now and what we can do in that situation. That's where your focus should be. If you want to develop a resilient mindset, your focus has got to be on what is going on in front of you right now. You can think about readiness as a muscle. If it is toned and flexible, you will be open to opportunity, able to shift your attention and awareness of your surroundings and your experience. If your readiness muscle is flabby and out of shape, you will struggle to focus on what really matters and often miss or fail to respond to life's opportunities. Let's go into acceptance. Acceptance measures the quality of your relationship with yourself. Can you metaphorically take yourself out to dinner or a movie? Or do you constantly beat yourself up, criticize who you are, and spend time thinking about the person you feel you should be? High acceptance scores suggest you are more self-aware than self-critical. Lower scores indicate there is a pretty large gap between who you are and who you want to be, or who people tell you you should be. You know who are some of the most self-critical people in the world? Would those be SJWs? Would those be SJWs? Ding, 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 ding. People who are involved in identity politics, this collectivism idea, all they ever do is criticize themselves and criticize other people. They do not have a high acceptance score. Insight. Insight reflects your ability to communicate and experience the feelings of emotion. High scores indicate a fluency in describing how you feel about yourself, about others, about a situation you find yourself in, or how you experience someone else's emotional state. Lower scores suggest a reticence or inability to describe, express, or experience emotion, and a high probability of fusing or becoming the emotion that you feel. Oh my God, does that sound like SJWs and Bernie Sanders supporters and intersectional feminists? I think it does. Again, they have a lower resiliency. They have a lower insight score. Intention. Do you live an authentic life based on a clearly defined set of values, or are you concerned with fitting in and gaining approval for how you behave? High levels of intention describe a person who can be themselves across many different situations. Lower scores indicate someone who struggles to be genuine or who puts greater priority on fitting in rather than being true to who they are and what they might believe. And listen, I don't know anyone who wants to fit in more than people who are running in listen, the very definition of collectivism is fitting in with the group. Isn't it? Isn't that the very definition of collectivism? I'm going to say, again, they have lower resilience scores because of that intention category. And lastly, action. Action measures your level of optimism, persistence, and drive. A person who scores highly on action is proactive, hopeful, ding ding ding, and tenacious. Lower scores reflect someone who has a more pessimistic or cautious outlook, a tendency towards procrastination, and lower levels of persistence. And that, folks, that describes every single one of the people that we read about in this article. All of these kids, and yes, I'm going to call them kids again because they have not been guided by the adults in their lives. They have not graduated to adulthood yet, so far as I'm concerned. All of these kids are lacking the basic tenets of resilience. We are failing an entire generation of people, and I have to question if maybe one of the benefits, honestly, of this pandemic is that it is going to wake up the educational system, because a lot of people are going to now see what is being taught to these students. And I suspect a lot of people are going to stand up and say, you know what? Not okay with this. Not okay with this. This is a time, now more than ever, that people need to know how to engage with adversity. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch what happens. I'm not worried about myself. I obviously know how to engage with adversity. I'm not worried about my husband, who, has engaged with more adversity than I have, quite frankly. But this generation of kids, ooh, we'll see what happens.